word to wise. Grass only greener when it's fertilized. Gave them truth in these songs, they prefer to lies. Destiny beautiful, adrift in her purple lies. You can't see me, you Stevie. Wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It is your boy Ernie, the Blerd Without Fear, and today I'm joined by a special guest, Troy Brownfield. Some of you might already be familiar. I actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know you had done work on it was the Grimm Fairy Tale series, and I believe you've also written other books like the one we're about to talk about. Like the Marvel for Dummies.
Yeah.
And you also have the what is now X-Men for Dummies. And that's what we're going to talk about. How'd you get into writing comics and writing for comics?
Man, that's a long story.
We got time.
Again, thanks for having me.
Anytime.
So what happened? What happened was back in when I was in college, I started. I was on the newspaper and I started writing some comic stuff there in terms of coverage. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the 90s that can be talked about. And wrote things like a story on Jack Kirby when he passed and things like that. And then a friend was developing this, like an early website, like 98, that was doing comics coverage. And so I started writing stuff for that. But then I had ideas of a lot of other things to do. And so I started my own site. It was called Shotgun Reviews because we covered a wide area. It had like wrestling and all kinds of stuff.
Okay.
And locally, I got noticed for that and started writing some stuff for the Indianapolis Star that included comics coverage. And then from there, it was like writing for other sites like Comic-Con. I started writing for Newsarama in 2004. And as you do this, you're making these connections and meeting people and stuff. And so, I wrote for Newsarama for 7 years, but it wasn't until later that like people started talking to me about interest in writing comics. And Raven Gregory at Zenescope and I had become friends, and I had done some indie stuff, like some very local indie things, but Raven asked me if I wanted to pitch on a Grimm Fairy Tales one shot. And, I did, and they picked it up. And so then it opened the door to them and Dynamite, and I was doing stuff for Fangoria and other places. And Matt Brady, who ran Newsarama, and I did like a Buck Rogers annual for Dynamite, and we did a Batman story for DC. And so it was like, it opened all these doors that was just this natural progression of my journalism side and meeting people. And at first, the funny thing was I had kind of resigned myself in that time around 2004 to that I wasn't breaking into comics, that it was going to be like I was just going to be doing the journalism side. And that was fine because it was fun. I enjoyed it. And, like 5-6 years later it's like Raven's like, hey, you want to pitch a story? Yeah. But then over time, I've continued to do journalism stuff. I work, I'm the executive editor of the Saturday Evening Post and the two kids magazines, which are Jack and Jill and Humpty Dumpty. I've done that since 2018. So journalism is my day job again. The short of the getting involved with the Dummies is I was really involved with bands and music scene in Indianapolis and stuff. And I met a guy a long time ago, who's a good friend named Steve Hayes, who played in a band and did a lot of stuff with organizing shows and everything. And I knew he worked for Wiley, who was the publisher of Dummies at the time. And he wasn't an executive editor then, but I knew he worked for it. And I thought, Steve and I are probably going to work on something together someday because he knows what my area is and I know what he does. And I'm like, at some point it would make sense. And so, summer of 24, Steve messages me for a call and he's like, hey, we're doing this. And we've got Stuart Moore was already on board to do Captain America for Dummies. And I'm like, so wait, Stuart Moore and then me? What the, and, but they're like, and so they had kind of an outline of like what a rough outline of what like the table of contents would be maybe for the book. And they said, well, what do you think? And so I gave them mine and they had me do a sample chapter that both Wiley and Marvel could read. And so I got Marvel Comics for Dummies,
Mm-hmm.
and that went really well. And as that was ramping up, that we started asking, like, we're going to do these other books, and I suggested Gene Selassie and Justin Peniston were two people I suggested. And Gene got Avengers and Justin got FF, so that was cool. But there was at one point going to be a sixth book that got moved later, which I can't talk about. But there's so they were gonna there's this gap, and there was a discussion of what could we maybe move into the gap. And I said, well, if you guys decide to do X-Men, I want to do it, because we'd already been talking about like other things. And they kind of went around the horn of like Wiley to Marvel, like, hey, what if we do X-Men here? And Troy's interested, and they were happy with the Marvel book. So it came back around that, let's put you on X-Men for Dummies. So I kind of went right from finishing the Marvel Comics one, like almost as soon as it wrapped, into starting the X-Men one. So that's why they both came out at opposite ends of 25, because the X-Men, the Marvel one was already done and ready to come out in like February of this year. And then the in between time, we managed to get it so that X-Men came out in December.
Okay.
But that was a pretty consistent string of work.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you stay pretty busy.
yeah, I always have. But this was really I mean, it's the easiest thing in the world to say, but it's a super cool thing to get to do. It's a super cool thing to work on.
Well, one of the things that I always found pretty interesting when talking to anyone who got to start like their start in comics, came like kind of like after doing journalism, either like centered around comics or like adjacent to comics.
Yeah.
And it's just whenever I've talked to anyone who's done anything quite like that, I always wonder, like, journalistic coverage of comics, does it ever paint how you tackle like actually writing a comic? Whether it is you just talk about comics just in general, or like you do like I guess like commentary or review of comics. I know sometimes for different people it can kind of, I don't know, I feel like sometimes it can kind of paint how you might go into the other thing. So like did any of that ever affect like how you wrote?
Yeah, I think too, when you come into a thing where you've done reviews and stuff for a long time, you can be regarded as maybe a hostile presence, or you've got to do a really good job, because people will have the knives out, like not just editors necessarily, but other reviewers.
Yes,
you got the chance to do it and they didn't. And I've talked at length about this thing with David Peppo is a good friend of mine. David, David got Janelle Aslan was editing at DC, and she was a good friend. She'd worked at Newsarama, and David was an intern there, and she introduced us because David was interested in Newsarama, and so we brought David in, started doing reviews with me on Best Shots, which was the column I launched and that David took over later. David really went through more of the ringer side of it, because he's had that thing where like and I've had it too, where it's like you've written a bad review of a book at a company, and all of a sudden you might write for the company. It's like it could be weird. Most of the time, I think people think that if you're being honest, like professionally about it, you're gonna say what you think, and then you're just gonna. I just think it's important you always try to deliver like your best stuff and hope that sorts it out. But and sometimes I think people don't think necessarily about how much work that they don't see that goes into the stuff. Because like when we had the opportunity, Matt Brady and I, to pitch for DC, and that story that we did was in a Batman 80-page giant. That was the fourth story that we pitched. It wasn't like the immediate one is like an immediate yes. It was like, here's a really cool one. And it's like, nah, because this is happening and we can't do that. And then like, okay, here's another. And it was several. And with that White Knight story I did, the Tales from Wonderland, the first one I did for Zenoscope, I'd given 3 pitches, and they picked one. They could have easily not picked any of them, but they invited me to pitch. And then that they went with that one, and so that was cool. But yeah, I think that it's a really great question, because you do have a lot of, I don't necessarily say this in a negative way, but like egos, and
Mhm.
some people might be like, oh, this guy already thinks he's an expert because he writes reviews on the internet, and it's, you run into a little bit. You got to prove yourself a little more. Now
Mhm.
on this dummy side, it's way more rooted. It's way more closer to a journalism, straight up, reporter. Although it's not the
Mhm.
same thing, but people know I can do that, and they're not holding that against me,
Right. Because I had talked to David about it before, so like it was something that kind of was stuck. It kind of stuck in my head, and the more I started like talking to people like that, I was like, oh yeah, I was like, I can kind of see I can kind of see how that might kind of pepper a little bit, how you might tackle something, how other people might perceive you, like what you
Oh,
do, and
I'll tell you this, it's no, nobody has their positions anymore.
Mhm.
There are times that I did get through Matt Brady, and too much straightforward negative feedback from editorial at different companies and writers, and like I was told once that one of my reviews hurt the writer's feelings, and I'm like, well, I'm sorry. Uh, but like, because they thought it was like too, and I'm like, I was being honest.
Yeah.
I'm, and it is a weird thing, because it is, for all the people involved in it. Comics is a kind of community where a lot of people do know each other, and
Yeah.
they talk to each other, and that's good, and sometimes it's less good, but I think that the thing that was on me, that was a good thing, was that people knew I was a deadline guy, that people knew
Mhm.
I would hit deadlines, and that I worked well with artists, because I respect what everybody in the team, color, letter, do tremendously, because I cannot do it. And so I respect all the players, and
Mhm.
like, even though some companies have different structures and things, I really um, think that as long as you are, there's kind of the three things this goes around. Like, if you're at least reasonably friendly, if you're reasonably good, if you're reasonably on time, you'll get work. And sometimes you only need to
Mhm.
do two of those, to you know. But and I think that the thing is, I have done less work, like straight up comic writing, in the last few years, mainly because of my regular job, but also, I'll be honest, I really hate pitching.
Mhm.
And I know, like, and I'll make fun of David a little bit here, because I love David, but David's a very elaborate pitch guy and everything. And one of the things that I think that really I hate is burning so much work
Mhm.
that is most likely going to be a no.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that it's like, you know, and I've done more shorts, um, over time, because that's a little less of a demand, because I know that that's the thing that a lot of people have to learn when they're breaking in, that it's
Mhm.
like, you don't want to pitch your 100 part series that's gonna run over the course of X number of years.
Right.
You need to get comfortable with, like, here's a solid 8 pages.
Yeah. That was one of the that was actually a piece of that was actually a piece of advice I got very recently from David.
Oh yeah.
But but as a person who has gotten his fair share of negative replies to things I've said on the internet, from the people I'm talking about, it makes me smile a little bit to know that I'm not alone in that regard.
Oh, no.
But
The internet is known for its positivity.
yeah, hey, come on, in a place where no one ever says anything mean. but no, one thing I really thought was interesting about what you're doing with the For Dummies
Mhm.
series, specifically this X-Men one, is, you know, like, my experience with the For Dummies books is kind of limited, largely because usually the types of books I would read for those, I usually am probably already like pretty proficient in for the most
Yeah,
part.
sure.
But like, I am always curious to see what is said, because I'm like, well, what are they telling you? Like, well, I want to see what's going on. And I got to read a little bit of it, and I was like, this is actually really cool. There was some really cool insights, but I was like, oh, you know, I'm actually kind of glad that this was handled this way or that way, so on and so forth. When you were compiling this, putting this together, for one, how long or how long did it take you to like do, you know, any or, you know, all research to you know, get it all together, or was any of it like just stuff you're like, oh yeah, I just know this stuff?
Well, that's a great question, and there's like parts of both or multiple ideas in there. Um, the Marvel Comics one is a little different because of the setup,
Mhm.
um, because you want to introduce the idea of like what the Marvel universe is. You want to introduce the history of the company, which I did, and then it gets into like bios, teams, locations, villains, kind of thing, you know. And it's a different. It's very much like the primer. It's you know, introductory. With X-Men, when you're going like more specific, my first thing was, I think that first chapter needed to be, which is what I did, about like dueling philosophies, like
Mhm.
Charles versus Magneto versus Cable, etc., and like kind of set up the thing, and then went into decades
Mhm.
and like 60s, 70s as a timeline thing, because um, two things with that. I thought it was just probably the most straightforward, but it goes so like conical from like, here's five X-Men and here's five evil mutants, and then we go like this over the decades. And so that the early stuff in particular, you know, not that I don't have a good grasp on recent stuff because I read it
Mhm.
and everything, but that early stuff when I was a kid, my first issue of X-Men was number 125 in 1979. I was 6.
Mhm.
And at the same time, Amazing Adventures was doing reprints of the 60s stuff. Um, so I was reading kind of both the original stuff and the stuff that was going on kind of simultaneously. So it was kind of neat to see like the two things, you know, as a kid, and understanding like there's this history here. But I read and reread a lot of that stuff so many times that when I was mapping the book, I found 60s, 70s, and 80s. I had a really great, straightforward
Mhm.
map of exactly what I was going to do. And, you know, even though I had always been reading through everything else, when you get into the 90s and stuff, it starts just to become much more complicated because the number of books and the things, and like, how do you decide what's the most important? And,
Mhm.
you know, like what's the spine of it? And, you know, and I found myself refreshing from the 90s stuff on a lot more. And I have a lot of this stuff in singles. I have a lot of this stuff in trades, but also Marvel Unlimited
Mhm.
was a terrific resource to be able to just pop something open. And it should be noted that with the Dummy series, all the writers picked all the art for the books because Marvel Unlimited was just open to us, and we could say,
Mhm.
as we're going along, we're like, these we asset requests basically for each chapter. You're like, I want like this image with this page, this image with this paragraph or whatever, and it happened because
Mhm.
the Dummies people and the Marvel people have amazing art and resource departments, and
Mhm.
the reproductions I think in the Dummies books are fantastic. The color and everything that they get with those panels, but yeah, it's the it like you said, it is a little bit easier going like, this is what happens in the 60s, this is what happens in the 70s, this is what happens in the 80s, and then it's like, then I've got to be like more judicious because you've only got so many pages, right? and I've said this elsewhere, but the funny thing, I've got two sons. One is turning 21 tomorrow. The other one's 19. They're both in college, and both fans. The older one's a little bit more of an X-Men guy. But when I'm writing the Krakoa chapter, and I'd be writing stuff, and I'm like, am I so far in the weeds with some of the things? I would like ask Connor, like, hey man, can you read like 5 pages and tell me if I sound like a crazy person? Because when you get into some of the stuff like the Moira's lifetimes and the Dominion and the singularity with the AI and then all the Orcus plot and everything, it's like, and I'm reading it and I'm understanding it and I'm writing it and I'm like, do I sound crazy? And I gotta be, but no, I felt like it did turn out. Connor was just talking to me yesterday, like about because he just read the whole book,
Mhm.
and he said, you know, he's like, I was reading. This is him. He was like, I was reading everything through like uh Fall of X and Rise of the Powers of X and everything, and he's like, and there was stuff where I'm like, am I confused? What's happening? And he's like, when I was reading the book, I'm like. He's like, "Hey, I felt like I actually understood it." And I'm like, "That's probably the best compliment, you know, I could get that it was the because those, I liked those stories. They're just incredibly complicated, and it's hard to
Yeah.
figure out exactly what to focus on when you're explaining it in that kind of sense."
Yeah, honestly, I think that's worth the price of admission itself, if I'm being brutally honest, because that was a very even for me, uh, I dedicated probably more than any other content creator in the comics spectrum on YouTube. I probably dedicated more of my brain power, my time, to creating videos about that era
Yeah,
of X-Men. And even for me, a guy who was terminally dialed in, like I was even reading, full disclosure, I was even reading the books I didn't particularly care for. Just to have full and total, scope.
yeah.
Just to be like, hey, I left no stone unturned. And even I had moments where I was like, huh. I don't know. I don't know what's. I mean, basically, there was a lot of. I mean, I guess uttered when I was kind of getting to some of those later portions, and there were even some things that probably only my hyper focused self would even remember about some of that stuff, and would be kind of like, oh, I mean, I forgive you if you didn't remember it. The Moira McTaggart stuff
Yeah.
from that era. And I remember, so I remember when all that was going on. So when you were initially getting to that, and you're having to deal with all like the lives and
Yeah.
oh, which life is this, which life is that. That to me, it was equally one of the more interesting parts of that whole thing, but it was also one of the more infuriating ones for me, just because it was so much to keep up with. And like sometimes I would even be like, I don't know which life was which. I can't remember. Trying to like map that, like explaining it like say you're explaining this is explain it for dummies. uh Was there ever any point where you were where you're just like, man, I don't know, man, I might need somebody to explain it to me?
Oh,
Yeah.
Totally. That's exactly why, like, I thought
Yeah.
this, because I wanted well, first of all, like, you just want to make sure you get it right,
Right.
and second, make sure that it reads well or smoothly. And I'll be honest, the most handwritten notes I had for anything was with the Moira lives and so
Mm.
forth, and I tried to trim it in the context of that to as close kind of to the bone as I could get, where it was like, oh, the Ninth Life did this, where it was like trying to be as specific as possible,
Mhm.
without getting like too lost in the weeds there. And then the flip side of that was interesting because we had a little bit of a discussion about it, because From the Ashes it started, but was only a few books in, and so rather than try to recap what happened in like issues 1 through 3 or whatever, or 1 through 5, whatever, I just gave kind of the setups for the premises of those books, in the chapter, because I figured anything that I say or say with any kind of, you know,
Like
definitive
certainty.
statement. Yeah, it's gonna maybe change here. So I just did
Mm.
like the starting thing, and also the notion was that if you really wanted to jump on, those first trades were already out. So you could
Yeah.
grab like the first few issues and read from that point. So it was like kind of like walked it to the door of From the Ashes, and instead of trying to wedge in, and then this happened, it was made more sense to me, and kind of everybody kind of agreed with that's a good place to kind of leave it, that you
Mhm.
can pick up here, and I think it was a good decision because they've already announced like X-Men United and
Yes.
stuff, so that it's like moving into a second version of that. And
Mhm.
if I try to get too definitive about Ashes, then it would have maybe been confusing to a person going like to the comic shop and stuff. Because, oh, what's this now?
What is this
Yeah,
thing you speak of?
yeah.
Well, so I'm gonna tell you where X-Men for Dummies is actually the most helpful for me. Like I said, I'm a guy who is even to this very day still very terminally dialed in. If someone were to remove these books from comic shops, I probably would just curl up and die. That's how hooked in I am. There are blind spots for me in the X-Men's history. So for me, I started in the 80s with the Outback X-Men. That was actually where I kind of initially dove in, and then just kind of progressed on from there into the 90s. So my memory of the 80s and the late 80s, early 90s X-Men is pretty solidified.
Yeah.
If Alzheimer's was to suddenly set in, I would probably still remember all that. I won't remember my kids' names, but I will remember what was going on. I was there for which also I got to ask how I have a question about another thing from that era, but um my timeline with the X-Men actually kind of cut off right around like the Grant Morrison era. Like and not because of Grant Morrison, because they're amazing, but it was just I had actually stopped reading comics almost entirely
Oh,
by that point. And because I was a stupid high schooler, and I was into being a bad boy and chasing girls and getting in trouble at school, getting kicked out of school, and all kinds of other weird, silly, dumb things. But when I came back to it, was like some years after, like kind of like because I think Grant started like around 2000 ish, and I think I came back like around 2009. So that's like my huge blind spot.
uh-huh.
And some of it I've gone back and reread. Like some of
Mhm.
it I've just like for whatever reason I just never got around to. So like when it came time for you to tackle the Grant Morrison era of the X-Men series, which is arguably one of the weirdest, I would say, just because like so much crazy stuff is going on.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of wild and zany things. Even though I've gone back and read, I'm like, oh wow, Grant was out there on that one. But what was it like diving into that particular era and trying to like, I guess, make some sense out of some of the crazy things that were going on then?
This makes I'll tell you a real quick great Grant Morrison convention story. Um, this is when he's doing JLA in the late 90s, and a friend of mine and I go to get some JLA stuff signed by Morrison, and he's sitting there and he's got like one of those big Guinness oil cans, big beer cans for people who don't know the Guinness oil can, uh,
Mm.
and my friend Russ says, "That's a serious beer." And without even looking at from signing, Morrison says, "Yeah, it's going to be signing from 5 to 7." And I'm like, he's just so fast, so funny, that yeah, that's like the impression I always took away from Morrison is that like, maybe sometimes he's kidding, that because he whips out some really spectacularly crazy stuff, but I think that sometimes he kind of does it with a wink.
Yeah.
Not that he's not real serious, because he's done some really great serious stuff like
Mhm.
Coyote Gospel and Animal Man and
Mhm.
everything. But the X-Men, I think that like he went into that with the idea of having a great time,
Yeah.
and I think he did. And
Yeah.
there is some, like you said, there is some batshit crazy stuff in that run, and it is hard to kind of distill some of it,
Yeah.
you know. Um, but it's cool enough that, and like I think that part of what made it confusing for people wasn't necessarily what Grant wrote, but stuff that they laid on top of it later. Like
Mhm.
Zorn being Magneto was the reveal until they made it that Zorn wasn't Magneto and everything, and that made it, I think, more confusing than it was on the face
Yeah.
of it, because Zorn as Magneto all of a sudden is like, it's a big holy crap moment, and it's, it makes some things beforehand make sense, but then when you kind of pull the thread away from it, then it does become more confusing. And I think that yeah, that I'm not knocking anybody for that. I think that that's part of the whole thing of ongoing comics that are, I call them perpetual motion machines, and this is the same
Yeah.
with like a lot of TV shows and stuff too, where it's like, um, one of the main things is to keep things going, and sometimes you have to change things along the way.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes like a TV shows, it's like cast changes or whatever, but like, as long as Benson and Finn are on SVU, it's going to keep
Right.
rolling. But like a whole stuff around them could change, like the whole rest of
Mhm.
the squad, the whole rest. And X-Men's kind of like that. As long as you have like the core ideas and some of the core characters, there's a lot of stuff that will change, and sometimes that might make a story that happened before now confusing because of something that was changed later. But that's also when you have collective writers, artists, editors, people working on this stuff over the decades, you're going to have that, whether it's
Mhm.
like continuity errors or conscious changes. And I think that maybe Morrison's run more than some others was affected and made like confusing to people because of stuff that happened later.
Mm.
That was like, but because you're like, you might have read that and like firmly like, this is what I thought happened. And then it's like, oh, that's not what happened, but it wasn't your
Yeah.
fault. It wasn't.
Somebody got a little they took liberties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too that that's you know, the X-Men, like, well, all of Marvel and DC really is that you have a balance of, you have an audience that is adults that have been with it their whole lives, and you have audiences of young people that are discovering from the first time, and it is hard to balance those audiences too, I think. And
Mhm.
which is one of the reasons the comics goes through these refreshing cycles every several years, is to kind of like, hey, new people, let's make it a little easier for the new people, or and old people stop complaining. No.
Well,
No.
I think
I am just as much like, I have my grumpy old man moments with stuff too.
I mean, I get it. As someone who is often accused of it, I sometimes have to shake my fist at the sky and tell the new kids to get off my lawn. Ever so often, just to keep them. I have to keep them on their toes. Is how I frame it. You mentioned talking about the timeline on X-Men, as well as like just some of the stories and things like that could just kind of be all over the place. And then it reminds me of something I was kind of alluding to earlier, when it comes to the 90s. Like, I was actively reading what was happening, and it
Uh-huh.
made no sense to me whatsoever. When you get to the Psylocke
I knew it.
portion,
He's gonna ask about Psylocke.
yeah.
Uh,
So you know what? Like, let's be honest with each other. So I'm gonna be as honest as possible. What the fuck was going on?
well,
how were you able to make any how difficult was it for you to make any sense of what was happening?
I think I was able to pull it apart pretty well, but like from a story standpoint, when it happened, it was kind of like the thing of, if I understand it correctly, you have these young artists and with a flair for certain things, and you have like Jim Lee, who
Mm-hmm.
obviously had a interest in like the hand and stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm.
then um, the notion that they wanted to refresh some of the characters and some of the looks a little bit, but that is admittedly a crazy refresh from taking somewhat demure British Betsy Braddock and making her into an Asian assassin, which is, maybe something wouldn't happen now. But
Yeah, no, I don't
but
think of that.
but but,
No.
but the fact of you did have kind of that transformation. I think fans responded to it because of Lee's art and everything.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, Salix and Ninja, she got changed by the Siege Perilous. This is cool. Introducing Revanche, and it's like she's the actual real Betsy, and this is Quanon, and it becomes very confusing to people. So they like realized it was confusing. They like whacked Revanche with the legacy virus pretty quickly. And so it's just like,
Yeah.
and everybody called her Betsy. And now they acknowledge that like light purple hair Psylocke is Betsy / Captain Britain, etc. Dark haired Asian Quanon is Psylocke in name. And
Mm-hmm.
even though they've got the miniseries out right now, the Psylocke Ninja, which is
Mm-hmm.
addressing
That strange occurrence.
yeah, and so I think that'll probably be helpful, but it was a little thorny to kind of figure out exactly how to describe that, because let's be honest, it is a series of weird decisions
It
that
was the 90s.
yeah
It was the 90s.
it,
That's my framing device for anything weird that happened back then.
and it is interesting because it's funny to me, like over time, like and specifically in the way that some characters are introduced and so forth, it always shocked me how many people didn't realize that Jubilee was Asian. And because
that's
that's a whole other can of worms. But
you know what? Send the meteor right now. Send it right now. End it all. I don't.
well, you brought up the Outback, which I love talking about the Outback era,
Mhm.
because it's really interesting in a lot of ways. And this is I've said this elsewhere, but I think it bears repeating, and it should always be mentioned. That period, and this is documented in places like Time Magazine at the time and
Mhm.
stuff, because the sales of X-Men being so big, they're printing bi-monthly, but selling about 500,000 copies an issue.
Mhm.
And the thing that people forget about the Outback era, two things in particular that I want to impress on people, is that was an insanely popular version of the team.
Yeah.
And two, Storm was the leader.
Yes.
You know?
At a time where she didn't really have any powers for a good chunk of the time.
Yeah. So Storm goes from 186 to 227 without
Mhm.
power. And it's 201 is where she has the fight with Cyclops for leadership, which was kind of the setup for X Factor anyway. But like Storm
Mhm.
assumes command of the X-Men. And in one of the most popular, one of the most best-selling eras of the team to that point, Storm was the leader.
Mhm.
And I say that as an avowed follower and defender of Scott Summers.
Same.
But but that notion
we'll get to him. We'll get to him in a minute. We'll get to
that notion of X Factor happening, was very cool and something I was really into as a kid, because I was 12ish, 13ish at the time that this is going
Mhm.
on. But that Outback era is super interesting in terms of setting up the taking over the Reavers base and using Gateway and all the different things that happen.
Mhm.
And that runs, a few years there. Like that's the team that's Fall of the Mutants. That's the team that's Inferno.
Mhm.
That's the team that's in these massive, very strong selling storylines is the Outback team. And I think that with that Psylocke Ninja series dipping back into that too a little bit, people
Mhm.
forget how popular like a team that had Longshot and Dazzler and Havoc and stuff was. It was huge. Yeah, you can't. There's also I saw this come up, like how much it's worth now. There was a 3-poster set that came out about the time that Jim Lee drew that was indicative of the Outback / Dissolution Rebirth era. That's 3 posters that fit together, and it had Forge and Banshee and Polaris, like when she had Zaladain's powers and was stronger and bigger, and
Mm.
Storm, Havoc, Wolverine, Jubilee. They're all in this 3-part poster, Psylocke. And that 3-part poster goes for like $250. And I still have
Jeez.
mine. Like I still have mine like wrapped up somewhere. But those were like, $6 a piece at the time or something. But they made a 3-part poster of that era. It was so popular. They had this massive poster that sold hugely to the point where people can't find it. That's
That's
interesting too.
crazy. Well, that was like I said, that was my jumping on point. I mean, obviously, I would later go back and read some of the older stuff, but like like I would eventually get around to diving into like Dark Phoenix and things, things of that magnitude.
Yeah.
But like, in like kind of Inferno, that era in Inferno was basically what kind of made me like a fan. Like,
Yeah.
like I was regularly reading. To the point that by the time that the 90s came along, if there was like any book that had like an X in it, I was probably going to read it just because I had already been it had already been decided I was a lifer at that point.
Yeah.
But now I have a very one Cyclops fan to another. Because I feel I always have to defend Cyclops. I always, it never fails. At least anytime I mention anything about Cyclops, there's always like a woodwork of people that are like, oh, Cyclops sucks, he's terrible. And then they'll start listing off all these things he's done that just makes him absolutely awful. Or at least in their eyes. And
Yeah.
I was interested to see like, tackling that particular character in any of his many like facets, like what when you were trying to like go through and figure out like, all right, what do we where are we going with this with Cyclops, what was it like to have to deal with so much Cyclops slander?
It didn't factor a lot into the book necessarily because
Mhm.
I just let the actual stories dictate,
Mhm.
you know, what I was covering. But being online and writing reviews sometimes is really frustrating with that because what a mystery. And I believe this was a Threads discussion that you had that I commented on, like
Mhm.
the people calling Cyclops a cop, and it's
Yeah.
like superheroes are functionally
Yeah.
peace officers to start with, but it's like, Wolverine not being a soldier and a secret agent and somehow doesn't count, right?
He was
Or
literally a Canadian cop.
yeah, the extreme X-Men becoming law enforcement, a team. And so it's like
Literally.
let's put that aside as just as a goofy thing. But I think that some of the, and it's like the whole thing of like Gene and Madeline and stuff was also editorially manufactured, that it was like, how do we figure out a way to get Cyclops away from here and over into X Factor, that it like spilled out into this thing of, and it's like you've got those eras. But I think that um overall what makes Cyclops so interesting to me and everything, and I liked him as a kid, and like I said, I started
Mhm.
reading where I was reading like 2 eras, where here's the 60s and
Mhm.
the what was going on at the time. I thought Cyclops was cool. I thought Wolverine, with the first few issues I was reading as a kid, was kind of an asshole until like the
Yeah.
health story. Um, you know, and but I I really liked the fact that he was conflicted. He was the one guy who couldn't control his powers. I liked that he was, you know, tactically brilliant.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things about the character that I think are very cool, but over time, the writers who've really figured him out, like
Mhm.
Morrison and others, have battened onto the fact that, this dude went through it. He ostensibly lost his parents. grew up in an abusive orphanage, became a child soldier.
Was lied to about having a third brother.
Yeah, and basically became a revolutionary.
Yeah.
Has literally died and come back defending his people. And I think that one of the greatest things, in the whole fall of X is the scene where he's in front of the court where he refused to speak, and he's like, "Now I will defend myself," and
Yeah.
adopt the hammer. And I'm like, I've been waiting for that stuff for forever, where he's just like, and I thought that they did some good stuff with the AXE judgment when the Avengers actually show up to help the X-Men when the Eternals attack. And they have that moment where Cyclops shakes Cap's hand, which is a wonderful bookend to what happened in Avengers versus X-Men.
Yeah.
When Cyclops was the guy on the beach that was ready to go down against the Avengers to protect Hope. And I think that if you put those things together, you see this really interesting character that has all of these facets, that he's imperfect.
Yeah.
But he is the guy you want up front. Because, Wolverine is your killing machine and everything, but he's flaky.
Like I always like for these types of characters, the Han Solos.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be Han Solo, but you can't have a team full of Han Solos, like rebels without a cause, that type of stuff. You can't have otherwise you just have 90s image. Otherwise, just have 90s image. That way is over there.
Yeah.
You need to have somebody who can actually lead the team. Someone who can actually make the tough decisions.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the things that's instructive about that from the Claremont era, the Outback era, is Claremont deliberately has Wolverine accede leadership to Storm. I mean, it's discussed. It's on the page that that Wolverine is like, I'm not a leader. You are a leader, and it's really not until the 2000s with X-Force when they have the Black Ops version of X-Force. Wolverine is like a real team leader.
Yeah.
And then he kind of becomes leader of his faction and the schism and Wolverine and the X-Men and everything. But ultimately they come back, because I think ultimately everybody realizes Wolverine is not ultimately the guy.
No.
And nothing on Wolverine. Wolverine is, you want to have a dozen beers with Wolverine. You want to get in a bar fight with Wolverine. Wolverine's going to show up. Don't know if Wolverine's the guy that helps you move, but he'll help you move the body.
Yeah.
But then, as far as the leader that's making all the decisions, I think that if you look at the framework of like a Storm, a Cyclops and stuff, you have the real leader characters.
Yeah, I've always thought of Wolverine as the tip of the spear, not the person holding the spear. Is how I've always like that. There's he is the spear that is thrown. He is as many fastball specials throughout the years would have already kind of dictated to us.
Yeah.
And then. Whenever someone has something ugly to say about Cyclops, I just always like to remind them, what would you do if you watched your girlfriend die in what is ostensibly a very blaze of glory death, and then one day some woman shows up who, for whatever reason, and no one asks questions, suspiciously looks like your dead girlfriend, and then suddenly, apropos of nothing, that dead girlfriend comes back. What are you supposed to do at that point? What what happens? This is people often try to put the label that Cyclops. Don't get me wrong, leaving Maddie to run off with Jean again. It's not a good look. It's not a great look. But here's the thing: who would have done differently?
Yeah,
what? Everyone acts as if they are so pure that that they couldn't be seduced by the allure of getting back with their dead girlfriend.
What's funny is I was looking at the panel the other day, and it came up as something else. There was a discussion of people online asking who the blonde was sitting next to Wolverine at Scott and Madeline's wedding, and it's Carol Danvers, and that was the
Yeah.
question. That was the thing. But then there's this hilarious discussion about Wolverine's face, like how angry Wolverine looks. It's like, is he jealous that he's marrying another redhead? You know,
Right.
and it's funny because it's like Wolverine does look very angry, and I think in dialogue, I think Kitty addresses the fact that Mariko had just died, and I think that that they just broke. Not she hadn't just died. That was later. That Mariko had broken off their engagement.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And like 173, like the end of the Japan story, that Mariko had broken that engagement off, and so maybe that's what Wolverine's going through watching this wedding. That Scott's got like a second chance of happiness, and Wolverine's just gotten shafted. You know, so maybe that. But it is kind of funny that, like, you know, Scott's marrying Jean's double, and Wolverine's pouting ostensibly.
Yeah.
It is kind of funny.
I was
But
like,
it's
look,
something I didn't think about at the time, but you know.
I mean, Carol likes short kings, so I mean, he could have just tried to date Carol. I mean, that she was right. It wasn't like Carol wasn't always hanging out at the X mansion anyway around that time. It was like she was practically despite not being a mutant, she was practically an honorary X-Man by that point, if I remember correct.
Well, yeah, that was totally a function too of Claremont reclaiming Carol from the Avengers 200 story.
Yes,
he wrote that Avengers annual 10 that has the scene where it's the rogue Carol thing, and then Carol confronts the Avengers at the end of it about how they kind of let her down. But interestingly enough, that's also the issue that introduces Madeline Pryor as a child.
Yeah.
So like Claremont's like 5 steps ahead for this stuff for a long time. Yeah, it's and I love being able to go back and look at some of those things that were tied together, or threads that were laid down. And people would talk about, oh well, he never finished the story, but I don't think he had an expectation that he necessarily had too quickly, because he had kind of carte blanche on that book and wrote it for so long that the idea of I'll get it to it eventually wasn't like an ego thing. It was just like he was just locked in. You know, he's like, I'll set this up, I'll do something next year, I'll do this, and you know, and then at a certain point that he didn't expect, you know, he ran out of next year's because everything changed with the 90s and stuff. And I wonder what would have happened if the Image guys had left before trying to exert more control on the books, or vice versa, because it was really that whole artist push-pull that like made Claremont leave, and then those guys all left. You know?
Yeah. So, they all moved on to make Image and be like, I would say almost in a lot of respects kind of, I don't know, it was weird because it was like Image was like everywhere after that point.
It's interesting. Like, you know, it's easy to what if stuff, and you know, Claremont has made his returns to the books and had some things that were really cool, but you know, he never got to finish a lot of those things that were the railroad tracks were laid down, and so like other people pick them up, and they're not necessarily what would have those things. But that's also part of shared universe comics, and the fact that you know, like one thing that's interesting to me is that in the crossover era, like the Mutant Massacre came out of the fact that really that Claremont and the Simonsons were friends, and Louise Simonson was editing X-Men. She's writing New Mutants. She's writing Power Pack. Walt Simonson, you know, her husband, he's doing X Factor. He's doing Thor. Claremont's doing Uncanny. And Mutant Massacre comes out of the three of them talking and doing their books in unison. Because people sometimes ask, like, well, why was Power Pack there? It's because Louis Simonson wrote it. Why was Thor there? Because Walt Simonson did it. You know, that, and those things were kind of organic, but it was so successful that the next year is kind of like, what's the big thing for this year? And Fall of the Mutants, if you notice Fall of the Mutants, which was the next one, it's still the same 3 principles, but those stories don't touch each other. The X-Men Fall of the Mutant story is the adversary. and the X Factor one is Apocalypse, and the New Mutants one is like the island with the mutates and stuff. So it's three distinct stories that don't necessarily touch each other.
Mm-hmm.
But then that's successful, so it's like, well, now what are you guys going to do next? And that's Inferno. And then Inferno ends up touching all kinds of books, like Spider-Man and everything, and that becomes like, then it becomes the thing of like, oh, every year there's going to be a big thing, It's like when that Master was way more organic. It's like
Yeah.
a dude and his friends who are married that all work together, and it's I've got an idea.
Which also I kind of miss that that type of that type of storytelling where it's like, hey, we're buddies, we're all friends, we're talking about our ideas creatively all the time anyway. Hey, how about we do something together? Like I feel like I don't know, I might be wrong, but I feel like that happens significantly less out like inside of like the because it's not just Marvel, but even within inside the spectrum of DC Comics as well. I feel like you only really see that type of storytelling when you're like in the creator-owned space now, where there's less, there's less, red tape. There's less people to go through. You don't have to be on someone else's, well, you don't have to be on like an entire company's timeline.
I really do think that is a very different climate with editorially driven comics versus maybe writer driven comics. That there's certain things like with respect to that era that these people were locked into long runs, and they didn't necessarily have the expectation that their run would be ending unless they ended it, or if they really messed up. But like all these books are selling really well, and they're selling really strongly, and and so they're kind of buckled in, right? They're like, I can plan this thing out, I can plan this thing. And it wasn't just, if you look at that Marvel's 80s era, not like my glasses are so rosy or anything, but you've got Claremont and a string of terrific artists on X-Men through that. Louise Simonson's doing New Mutants. You've got Walt Simonson doing X Factor and Thor. Avengers has Roger Stern. There's all of these excellent things that are going on. Spider-Man's got like crazy good stuff. Mantlow's doing cool stuff on Alpha Flight. You've got like a real interesting run of these people who are on really long runs on these books, like really long runs of writing and drawing these books. And it does change a bit when it starts going into more of a round robin creative teams and stuff. Like you might have, the artist might switch every 6 months, or you might have like a lot of fill-ins or anything. There is a different feel than when Byrne drew X amount of issues straight through, or Silvestri drew X amount of issues straight through. And so you do have that kind of different feeling. And now there's the thing of like, there's a lot of relaunches. And so the relaunches are almost, not necessarily one-to-one on this, but like a lot of the relaunches will have a new creative team. Like Moon Knight's had a lot of number ones in the last few years, but Jed has been the writer most of the time. And those are more like, I feel like those are more like chapters. He's gotten to like do a chapter kind of thing. But so that one's a little bit of an outlier. But like, you have like a writer will be on Avengers for like Jason Aaron or whatever for a certain amount of time. And then instead of that story wrapping up and it just goes to the next one, there's like a new number one after that. And I think that kind of is a different feeling than what we had as kids, where it was like the adventure continues, where it just keeps going on, and not necessarily a stop and restart every time.
Yeah, because I think I remember for the longest time erroneously thinking so much that like I remember when when it was just the adjectiveless X-Men had relaunched at #1 in the 90s. You had the big gatefold cover book and everything, and I remember like, oh Chris is on and Jim Lee's on, and it's like, okay, all right, cool. And then for whatever reason I almost didn't notice, not because of not to say that you're Chris did anything bad or wrong or anything, but just like
Yeah.
I just at the time I was a kid and I didn't know any better. It took me a while to notice that Chris wasn't writing the book anymore after a certain point,
Oh yeah.
and I was like, wait a minute. I was like, why? Like I noticed that the story seemed to kind of be a little different, like the tone seemed to be a little bit different, but I was like, oh wow. I was like, he didn't write as much of that as I thought he did. That was Fabian that kind of came in and
Yeah.
was on, and I was like, oh wow, yeah. That was kind of around the time when that you had that changing of the guard,
Yeah.
and whatnot. But like I do remember thinking like, yeah, it was kind of confusing how like it seemed like Chris was just getting cooking, and then it's like, okay, well, nope, psych. Pocket sand. He's out of here. We got another guy in here, and it's like it's why I have a love-hate relationship with relaunches, is because it's like, yeah, on one hand, I think it's actually kind of nice because it does kind of help people differentiate when a creative team has maybe shifted, but then in those instances where the creative team does not shift, I'm kind of like, well, why the hell do we relaunch it? But I kind of get it, like in the case of like things like Moon Knight, I'm like, yeah, I guess it kind of makes sense. It's the complete end of a story, and we're telling a new story, kind of in the same framework of the original one. It just, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just wish that that books weren't relaunching. Like if someone looks in the direction of a book like sideways and they're like, relaunch.
Mhm.
New #1s, everybody. New #1s. And it's like, I don't know. I wish I had a better way to do it, but I don't.
Yeah. It's hard to say. The market's so different now because
Yes.
there used to be multiple points of purchase, like the spinner rack was a real thing.
Yeah.
Walden and
I
things
used to go to
that was,
Walgreens and pick
yeah,
up comics sometimes. Like I go into like a Walgreens, I go into a Kroger's or like grocery stores, whatever. If I like missed something at my LCS, I could be like, oh, this is right here. I can just go and grab it right now.
yeah. Kroger was like my first comic shop, until seriously, and I
Mhm.
read about comic shops and ads for comics,
Yeah,
and
that's
I made that connection. Like, do we have one?
Mhm.
And I looked in the phone book and found that we had comic shops in my town.
What
Like
dark
my town,
sorcery.
Louisiana, had comic shops, and so I started going to the comic shop as a thing, and but it was the grocery store. And it was kind of a safer era. So like my mother
Mhm.
could deposit me at the spinner rack, and
Yeah.
she'd go shop, and then when she came back, I could get one or two because they were like 40 cents each, and that was a thing. That was a real thing.
Man, the day. Going back and looking at some old comics I used to read and seeing like I think the cheapest mine ever were at any one point was like $1.
Oh yeah,
But even then, like I was like, oh my god, I have like I would like my mom would take me to the shop and I'd get like my allowance. I'd have like $20 or whatever because like I cut the yard or like I cleaned up, helped
yeah.
clean the house or whatever. And I'd be like, I'd walk to a store like $20 and I'd just be like, I can have it all. I can buy every like you really couldn't buy everything,
Yeah,
but I mean, but like I was like, I can buy whatever I want. I can buy every issue of all the X books that came out this week.
yeah,
And some other books. I can buy some DC books and some other like that. It's crazy to think about, but yeah, that was I have, and you bringing up reminds me, I've had other people talk about it. That there really should be some consideration into going back to that business model of having multiple points of sale where like, I mean, I get it. We have like digital sales now, but
yeah,
like, I think it would not be a bad idea if, maybe, revisiting the idea of being able to walk into your local, drugstore, your local bodega, or your local, grocery store,
yeah,
whatever, or like just a general bookstore and be able to pick up single issues. I know that there's probably a lot of logistics into it it would probably be a logistical nightmare to start, but I think that's why people read comics as much as they did like during that time frame.
Yeah, the distinguished competition has comics in Circle K's now.
Which is just insane to me that is, it's like, because but I would, I would love to see those sales numbers just to see like, like if it's, because I think there's merit. I think there's actual merit to going back to that business model, like full on, like just complete head first dive into it, because like I said, I knew so many more, maybe it's because, culture has changed, but, and comics culture has changed, but I feel like I just knew way more people that, read comics, or at the very least, glimpsed at them because they were in places that they were going,
Yeah. And I've noticed that the shelf space has changed a lot in like Barnes and Noble and so forth, that it's tilted way toward manga, which, if that's what people are buying, great, that you should arrange your shelf space for that. But it is indicative of that the bookstore consumer is consuming comics, but a different strata of comics.
Right.
And so that maybe should be recognized a little bit. I think that
yes,
things like DC's like $10 collections and Marvel's Epic collections go a long way toward getting people, recurring, because like those Epic collections are great in that it's like 15 to 20 straight issues of continuity, and if you haven't read this stuff or haven't been able to like put together the back issues, man, it's great to pick up. Hell, here's 20 issues of Power Man and Iron Fist. I never saw that, and like I did, but other people might not have seen it, and like that's a great grab because you get it for approximately the same amount you'd spend on like new comics, but also it's a lot cheaper than trying to fill those holes with the original issues, and like you're mining potentially new fans out of that because they are able to go back and read the historical stuff. And I've done the past couple of years, I've picked up a lot of Marvel Cosmic stuff from the 70s in various collections because I never either read them or didn't have the finances to pick them up.
Dang.
Like the Jim Starlin, Captain Marvel, Adam Warlock things, they were hard to find, at least in my area, so I was able to go back and get some of that stuff and read it, and it's great, but having a function where you can get those collections, I think is just a great deal.
Oh no, 100%. I it's why I encourage people you go back and pick up those collections, pick up those reprints, the trades, omnibus collections. I'm a huge proponent of that because that's how I've read a lot of stuff that I missed back in the day. Like and I always like when people ask like, oh, you haven't. You're probably one of these modern X-Men fans. You don't read the old stuff. It's like I grew up with the old stuff, and I literally have some of the old stuff literally like on my shelf over here, obscured by a piece of construction paper that covers up my X-Men section that I just noticed. But like, but yeah, like I have those omnibus collections of like the early like Claremont stuff where like Claremont was just getting cooking on X-Men, but and I go back and read it sometimes, and that's why like when people ask like why you don't remember this stuff, it's like I remember, I literally just read it. I literally just went back and read it, literally right there. But what I want people to go read, I actually want people to go check out this book. I want people to go check out X-Men for Dummies because like I said, I feel like it covers a lot, even for me, a guy who I feel I'm pretty well read. I wouldn't call myself an X-Men historian, but I feel like I know enough to hold intelligent conversations about the X-Men. But
I think you do well.
I don't know about all that. I don't know.
I've seen you talk about stuff online and in your videos and threads and whatnot. You've got it. You got to handle as much as anybody.
Yeah. I'll take it. I accept that assessment. Yeah, but I even for me, I love a good I love a good book that serves as kind of a doorway to help people that because I know a lot of people, they don't have time to read everything, they don't have time to go back and get some of those those older collections, but like if you can get that information in one book and kind of sit down and be able to say, okay, well maybe this kind of helps fills in the pieces for me, or maybe like if you're someone who you have an interest in the X-Men, but you don't know, or maybe like you watch like the animated series, you watch X-Men 97, you're like, man, I kind of want to get into these comics, but I don't really know where to start. Yeah, I would think X-Men for Dummies would be a pretty good place to look, because the X-Men's timeline is long and has a lot going on in some spaces. So right. I think whether an expert or not, whether you've read a lot of X-Men comics or not, I think there's value to be found in X-Men for Dummies. So no, anytime. Like I said, I'm just spitting the facts. But I will have a link to I'll have a link to the book where you can go pick it up. And also I want to have some links to your socials, and links to links to the website and everything. And also I want to give you opportunity to if you wanted to plug anything else while you're here.
Well, if you haven't had enough of me, like I said up top, I'm the at the Saturday Evening Post. I write a lot of stuff on pop culture, a lot of music things. I just did a piece on the biggest live albums of the '70s. So my interests vary. So we've got a lot of good stuff there, and with respect to socials, I'm generally pretty findable on like Bluesky, Threads, Facebook, etc. But like I said, a lot of my ongoing regular work is at the Post, and then when I have things that appear other places, I will plug them on the regular socials. So. Usually just at Troy Brownfield.
Well, we're gonna have all that all that's gonna be in the description. Y'all go do that. I highly recommend you do so. And yeah, just thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And and it was a great conversation. I honestly I know you mentioned earlier there was something else that was kind of in the pipeline, but you couldn't really talk about. I hope that comes to fruition, so we can get together and talk about that too. Because I feel like if Marvel for Dummies and X-Men for Dummies is any indicator, then I'm excited to see what else you got. So thank you again, and for everybody else, like I said, go click the links. And keep it plus ultra till next time. We're out of here. Peace.